I want to thank you for your time today, Victor. I'm very appreciative. I'd love us to start simply by you just telling us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah, I'm an executive coach. I work in the software industry, mostly with CEOs in that field. Been sort of doing that on and off, 15, 20 years at this point. It all kind of blends together. And sort of as a side experience, about back in 2009, I did some research around recessions. I have a background in economics, quantitative economics out of Stanford, and the whole world kind of imploded. It seemed like the economy was going to end,
Yeah.
which is a common theme you'll notice here in a lot of recessions. And so I just did a personal research project around, okay, like, what do we do? Like, what do I do in my own business? And my first go-to is find somebody who's already been through it, except people who are running businesses, in the Great Depression or were all over 100 years of age. So
Yeah.
that wasn't a great resource. And
Yeah.
so second best is to learn from history. And
Mhm.
so did that history, did that research, discovered a lot of other people might benefit from that, and ended up writing a book called The Recession Proof Business, just
Yes.
sort of summarizing what I found out about that.
And can I do a little plug for you here? It's a great book. I love it. And that's part of the reason why we're chatting is because I've read the book and been a big fan. In terms of the research that you've done with regards to the recession in businesses, because I think it's quite comprehensive what you've done, and I'd love for you to share some of that if you can.
Yeah, sure. Let me start sort of just big picture wise, because I think it's super important to understand that, back in 2008, 2009, this whole emotional experience of the recession, it really was the belief was, oh my God, the world has ended, right?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it didn't. And in 2020, it feels like the world is ending all over again. So the emotional experience is very similar. This is my third sort of once in a lifetime, macroeconomic event.
Yes.
At this rate, I'm going to think there's going to be another one, right, at some point. And so the big thing to think about is to, first of all, don't read the headlines, because
Right.
the headlines are designed to generate advertising revenue.
Yes.
The scarier the headline, the more you're going to read, the more it improves their sales, right? It's a revenue generation tactic,
Yes.
not less on accuracy. What you want to pay attention to is the numerical data. And so what was really interesting is I remember reading the headlines, and then I remember looking at the numerical data of various recessions that were considered catastrophic.
Yes.
So in 2008, for example, US GDP contracted by 5% in the full year, calendar year 2009.
Right.
And from an economist standpoint, that's devastating. Like,
Yeah.
that's devastating. Okay? And we have a lot of forecasts, and the current forecasts aren't out yet for our current economy, but you hear numbers sort of all over the place.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking back in 2009, like, 5%, like, that doesn't seem that bad compared to like the end of the world has arrived.
Right.
And so I say, Pierre, if you were earning $100, right, sort of just to make the math easy, and like the recession came and now you're only earning $95 instead of 100, like, you would be disappointed, you'd be annoyed, you want to get it back higher, but like, you're not planning your like career funeral, right?
Yes.
Right, with that. And so that's the most important thing to keep in mind is in what's considered a catastrophic level recession, 5% is considered catastrophic, or anything above. 95% of the economy is still there.
Yes.
And that's the thing people miss, just mindset wise. And
Yes.
all the headlines are about the 5%, the quote unquote 5%, whatever the number might be, that's disappearing.
Yes.
It gets 95% of all the news headlines is about that 1% because it's scary, right?
Yeah.
And so what's more important, though, is to realize 95% or some very large number is still there. The U.S. economy, GDP today, is right around $20 trillion. If we get a 5% drop, that means 19.5 trillion still there. If it's 10% drop, right, I mean, we have 18, or the math is a little off, but you get the idea. But what happens, though, is entire sectors, entire industries often will collapse, shrink quite significantly. 2001, 9/11, dot-com bust in 2000, tech sector came down, airlines came down. And so what you find, though, is it's this weird pattern that's important to recognize, which is within sectors, entire sectors shift quite dramatically. But there are new sectors that expand. Right. So the overall total doesn't shrink all that much, but within the pie that remains, there's a lot of shifting of customer demand, which is different than shrinking. Like that's the important thing.
Yes, great distinction. I like that between shrinking and that's great. Yeah, shifting.
So a few examples that are pretty common these days. So like food, right? Like I haven't lost any weight. In fact, the opposite, right? Most people aren't either, right? But so people's demand for nutrition and calories hasn't changed, but
Yeah.
how they fulfill that need, has changed, right?
Mhm.
So in 2009, it was, top tier elite restaurants. People weren't going as much, and they were
Mhm.
going to the mid tier. Those who go to the mid tier were going to the quick serve. Those who go quick serve were doing fast food. Those who could no longer afford fast food were buying groceries, right? And
Yes.
now we have restaurants, like no one's allowed to go to a restaurant, in the United States, or
Yes.
very few states anyway. And you see all the demand shifting to takeout, to delivery, huge demand for groceries. And
Yeah.
so you're seeing that sector really struggle a lot. And I think that industry is actually quite interesting because it really epitomizes a lot of the principles I talked about and discovered in my research.
Yes.
So there's a great restaurant here in Seattle. I'm in the Seattle area. It's called Canalese. It's like
Mm.
the premier, most prestigious, most expensive. It's $500 to $2,000 per person per meal, right, for dinner. Um, and that business, within a week of the pandemic, they shut the whole business down, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And they converted to what did they do? They did a breakfast drive-through coffee stand, right? They did box lunches to go, not for $2,000 a meal, but for $15. And they
Wow.
did dinner delivery service, right? Which is that level of the guy got it totally right,
Yeah.
right? Like he knew any of the research. That's a very intuitive, my guess, but he got it exactly right. He knew that wasn't going to sell, and he knew what was selling, what was still legal, and they
Yeah.
converted. You got other restaurants in the area that have actually become grocery stores, right? It's if you got a wholesale food suppliers, I buy 500 tomatoes a day, I buy a bunch of milk, I buy a bunch of cheese. Grocery stores are sold out, they're out of stock on things like flour and yeast. I buy that in bulk. And so you see a lot of few restaurants that are very savvy. They're just doing grocery deliveries
Yes.
because they know that's what people want.
Yeah.
So the big theme is to figure out where the money is shifted to. Vast majority still there, but where it's getting allocated to changes. And so one of the key things that CEOs, entrepreneurs, executive and sales marketing organizations need to really pay attention to is where the money is now is
Mhm.
not where it used to be. It's still out there, but you got to go find it, right? Which
Mm.
is a different skill set than what a lot of us are used to in relatively stable market environments.
Yes. Any secrets about how they can find out where the money is gone?
Yeah, so I think there needs to be a discovery process,
Mhm.
right? So I don't read news headlines. I read sales pipeline reports, right?
Yes.
Preferably by market segments. So within my product line, how's it doing? Within this region, how's it doing? Within each channel, how's it doing? Indirect versus direct. And I'm looking for trends, right? And the ones people tend to notice are things that are dropping, right? Because it's
Yeah.
a negative. But I'm looking for the things that didn't drop when I thought they were supposed to, right?
Mm. Okay.
So, and for me in 2008, I noticed like 90% of my sales were gone in 2008 with the market crash.
Yes.
And then I noticed like, well, 10% were still there, right? So I was really upset about the 90% drop in income. And then after a little while, I kind of had my little grieving, session around that sadness. I'm like, but why are the 10% still there? Like,
Mhm.
I didn't know, right? And so I went to go interview my customers who were still buying to figure out why. Right?
Mm.
So if you have a sales channel, a particular customer segment, a particular product offering, maybe it's a product versus a service. So if
Mhm.
something is still performing relatively better off than the rest, you
Yeah.
got to figure out why.
Great. I love that. So interview your clients who are still buying at this point. Is a
Absolutely. And then with respect to prospects, what's usually obvious is the prospect says, we don't have the budget for that. We've deferred that project. Sort of a lot of the standard objections you find sort of in a tight economic environment.
Hmm.
What you need to figure out is and often it's like, this is no longer a priority. We still like you guys, we still like you, Peri, but right now it's not the right time, right? And
Yes.
so then the question then becomes, well, what are you working on? What is your priority?
Mhm.
What problems do you have? And one of the big things to look for is to find a problem that gets worse for prospects and customers during a recession, right? And, one of the things I realized when I did my initial research was, in the last 150 to 200 years or so, roughly every 5 years, every 5 year period, we have 4 years of growth, a good economy, and sort of like one bad year that's kind of soft and off.
Mm.
And so 80% of the time, conditions are pretty good over the last, almost 2 centuries.
Yes.
And what's interesting is that something like almost 70% of the Fortune 500 companies were started in bad economic years,
Mm.
which I found really surprising,
Yeah.
right? So this is Disney, this is UPS, this is Costco, this is Vanguard funds. The index fund was invented essentially during a recession. Charles Schwab started in a recession. And you have all these sort of name brand companies that all started in the 20% of years that were quote unquote the worst for the economy
Mm.
overall. And what I've come to realize is that I talked about markets shifting, the shifting of demand away from traditional markets. That's usually pretty obvious.
Yes.
But that demand is going somewhere, and it's going to new opportunities that really weren't a big deal before, right? So in this current pandemic, there's a company called Outdoor Research. They make a lot of raincoats for outdoor hikers and backpackers. And I sort of, a lot of people, I work in search and rescue as a volunteer in my spare time. So a lot of my colleagues wear outdoor research
Nice.
gear.
Nice.
Yeah, and they shut down because yes, it's raining outside, but everyone's in. So we don't need more raincoats, right? We got enough.
Yeah.
They decided to convert to making medical masks, right? And
Beautiful.
they did it very early before it was sort of more popular now. There's a children's shoe manufacturer, I think out in Philadelphia, that's also making masks. Like, wait a minute, that's just fabric, right? And we kind of combine multiple fabrics together. Like, how's that different than making shoes? It's multiple fabrics and materials that we bind together. We know how to do that.
Yeah.
So it is finding where the demand is shifted to and solving that problem that now emerges, right, for companies. I was working with a nonprofit, a sort of pro bono client of mine from many years ago, right before our call here. And they work with helping keep children safe, right? And that would usually be from bullying, cyberbullying, people who want to do kids harms, walking to school safely, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And right now, like, there's no need for that because kids aren't walking to school, right? They're stuck at home. And so one of the suggestions I gave was now parents are worried about like the kids getting sick, right? So if the kids go out to outside to ride their bicycle in the neighborhood, which is still allowed as long as you're close to home, but you still got to be smart about it, right? If the neighborhood dog, neighborhood friend comes up and wants to say hi, like keeping your distance and practicing those skills. So these are all new problems that are existing. It's manufacturing ventilators rather than automobiles, right? These are all problems that are getting worse in this particular economic environment. And everyone's a little different, but the key is to find that demand by being out in the marketplace, observing, asking questions, and finding the headaches that people still have.
Yes, makes a lot of sense. I remember reading in your book about the fact that you had certain rules that you discovered were sort of a pattern of the success of companies. Be curious, I'd love for you to share a little bit about that if you could.
Sure, absolutely. So I think the companies that really do well in this kind of environment, they have a big mindset difference, right? From the sort of the 80% sort of who struggle, or don't succeed at all. So one is the big mindset difference. The mindset really is there's still money out there.
Yeah.
I just got to go find it. The predominant belief is the economy is over. It's the end of the world. There is no money. Therefore, logically, I shouldn't do anything because it's pointless, right? If you believe that to be true, logically, you would do nothing. So those that really survive and thrive, they believe it's out there. They just haven't found it yet. And then they go looking. So sort of what's more of a psychological mindset shift.
Yes.
And second thing is they don't read headlines, right? That again, the headlines are very skewed for a very particular psychological purpose. If you are scared, you buy more newspapers, you watch more news, you click on more links, right? You're generating revenue for that industry. That's their recession-proof, approach. So take it with a grain of salt. I still read the news, but oftentimes right now there's a lot of news, for example, with medical research. And I just skip the news article. I just click on the actual publication because now online. And then I read it myself to get the actual data. Oh, okay, that's interesting, or it's not, right?
Yeah.
Sort of third mentality difference or actual behavioral difference amongst those who thrive are really those who are looking to exploit opportunities, right? So when I look at companies that have done well, they don't think of the recession as a time to do defense, right? They will do that initially, right? If your cost structure is way out of line, you're going to be bankrupt.
Mhm.
You got to fix that.
Yeah.
But they very quickly shift to, okay, let's be aggressive, right? The question is where and how, not if.
Yeah.
And so that's the big theme I'm seeing with my companies and the companies I work with. I'm on a couple companies in terms of boards and whatnot.
Yes.
And that's the big shift is, okay, where are we going to be aggressive and find the right spot? And then the last sort of rule of thumb is around adaptability. It's not the big that survive, it's really the most flexible, right? So the
Mm.
idea of sort of adapt or die very much applies, in this environment because it's changed so much.
Yes.
And what I always say is, if the world's changed like 70% overnight and you've changed only 2%, you're going to get killed,
Yeah.
right? So the greater the change externally, the greater the change internally, the greater the change in one's own psychology, all that has to be proportional. And
Hmm.
we're seeing a huge, just like unprecedented amount of change, right, in sort of society and the economy. So the amount of change that you need to consider in your own businesses needs to be often of equal proportion. So a lot of changes.
Yes, I like that. That's a neat analogy, comparison of the two. I like that. Um, in terms of, in your book, you talk about marketing and what should a company be considering as the recession is coming, and now that we're in it.
Yeah, so I'll say two things. With marketing, there's two parts of marketing. One is getting your message out, and the other is more strategic. So to whom do you get the message out? What message? So let me start with the strategy part. So marketing strategies need to change to reflect the times and the psychology of where your customer and your prospects are right now. Okay,
Mm,
so 6 months ago they're all about being aggressive. Right now they're scared and they're worried.
yeah.
Right, so recognizing in your message that you understand their problems today is super important, right?
Mm,
6 months ago they wanted to grow sales, now they just want to be more profitable, right? Want to
yeah.
be more efficient. So the themes they still buy, often they still buy the same things, but the
Mhm.
reasons they buy and
Yes.
what motivates them changes. So who you target with what message needs to reflect where they are now, not where they were
Mhm.
supposed to be. Like the companies that get killed are the ones that were fixated on what companies and customers were supposed to be doing. Doesn't
Mm,
work. Doesn't
yeah.
work. Yeah.
Great.
And then once you sort of know who and what you're offering in terms of what problem you're solving and what message to convey that really resonates with them, then it's about having an offering that has a point of differentiation, right? So if I'm selling something, it's like, why buy mine versus somebody else, right?
Yes.
So for that company, outdoor research that makes here, like, hey, they're used to making life-saving equipment. Like
Mhm.
I, I literally rely on their fats, right, to keep them dry, keep them warm, keep them from dying of hypothermia. This is just the same idea of a critical type of clothing application. And so you should buy ours because we know how to make gear to keep people alive, right? It's a good message, right?
Yes.
So I think that becomes the point of differentiation, making sure that's very obvious in the marketing message, and then just doing a lot of it. Once you found sort of the magic formula, who's spending money, why they're buying, you got a product that solves that problem, you've highlighted what you're doing differently that makes it useful, then it's just being aggressive and getting that message out.
Mm. And in terms of maybe some examples for people about, companies that have done well in a recession or even
Yeah,
started in a recession. Yeah.
absolutely. I'll give you the ones that start in a recession. And I'll say the rule of thumb isn't like this business is a good business in a recession, right? That's sort of, people have this fixation now. It's more that the business was very appropriate for the times for that
Mm,
particular recession.
yes.
So, for example, Costco, started, I believe, in the 70s. And it was a time when, money was tight, right? Which people kind of relate to now. And they
Yes.
had a very interesting model. Like most people think of Costco as selling things really cheap, which is like what you want, but really cheap. And that's not the model. The model is you have to buy more than you really want
Yes.
or a really ridiculously low price, right? So good times, it's a hassle. I don't want to deal with it. Bad times, I'm willing to stuff stuff in the garage, right, if I can get a lower price. So they really changed the economics of that business. It was a very different kind of value at the time. And not surprisingly, they're still doing well today because that formula works really well. So that's one example. Disney was a big one. They started, I think, around the Great Depression,
Hmm.
and it was sort of an affordable luxury. It was a form of escapism. Like, my
Yes.
gosh, the outside world is so literally depressing. And then there's this thing called Mickey Mouse. I'm like, oh, it brings a smile to my face, and it's a relatively inexpensive way to laugh, to smile, when everything else has a lot of sort of negative emotions around it. So that was a big one. UPS, they started, I think, in 1907. And the big change at that time was there was a big recession in the United States. And there was one sector that was really booming, and that was around precious metals. So there was a gold
Mm.
rush up in Canada, and here in Seattle is where they had a big hub at the time, and they would try to get logistics of goods, services, material, equipment, food, sort of into the boonies where there really wasn't a lot of support towns. And so they start off with getting packages there. Originally, it was a lot of bicycles, and they just solved a particular need that was very evident at that time that was really underserved by other people. So that's the big theme, is that they solved a problem that was being overlooked by somebody else. And many times, not all the time, but many times that problem didn't exist prior to the recession or those
Mhm.
particular years.
Now that we're in the pandemic, which, um, I mean, how are you seeing that it's different from before? And then we'll take it to maybe what would you see as something that leaders and business owners need to think about?
So I think the patterns aren't that different. I think
Okay.
the underlying cause of why we're having the contraction of demand, it isn't a collapse of stock prices or this. Those are all sort of symptoms, but
Yeah.
it's just this thing called the virus, right?
Right.
And so we're having so the decline in the economy isn't unusual. The fact that people aren't buying isn't unusual. The fact that money's tight isn't unusual. It's just really what's driving it. So one of the differences for this particular probable recession, because the numbers aren't out yet,
Yeah.
is that really to get the economy fully back, we're going to have to address the root underlying cause of what caused demand to fall. So in this particular instance, medical issue, right? Other recessions, has been a banking issue, a regulatory issue,
Yes.
particular kind of commodity that was sort of overpriced, those kinds of things. And so recessions are usually very good for uh, course correcting excess, right? So
Mm.
in 2008 was housing prices just really shouldn't have gotten that high, right?
Yeah.
The homes weren't actually worth that much. And so recession comes, there's foreclosures, there's bankruptcies, prices come back to where they really should have been to begin with. And then a year or two later, we kind of get back to sort of a more sustainable growth.
Yeah.
So same pattern, except this is medically driven. So the medical drivers need to be addressed, right, to
Mhm.
fully get out of this recession. So that's a bit of a twist compared to prior ones.
Mhm. And for what you're seeing in this, we're in the pandemic. When we're doing this recording, we're about 5, 6 weeks, depending on where you are in the world. Um, what are you seeing in terms of anything different that a leader can be doing at this particular time to help?
Yeah. So there's a particular phase companies are going through right now. I used to work at a company called McKinsey. It's a big consulting firm for the
Yeah.
Fortune 500. And I was on, one of their webinars for alumni, a lot of whom are Fortune 500 CEOs. I'm not, but I'm going to listen in anyway, right?
Yeah.
And so they kind of did a survey of like, where are their clients at in terms of their mentality? And so I'll sort of paraphrase, because I kind of arrived at a very similar conclusion, given the companies I have access to. And right now, it's mid-April. It's a massive global recalibration effort,
Mm.
right? So everyone's looking at their sales pipeline, like, well, how much sales are still there? I'm not totally sure, right? And then if the sales are now at this level, like, what does my budget have to look like? And there's a ripple effect, right? So if I, am like a hotel chain, right, and you serve me, then my sales are down 80%, 90%.
Yeah.
That's going to impact your sales, like a week or 2 or 3 weeks later, right? Then your suppliers will be impacted 2 weeks after that, and it ripples through the entire economy. And then finally, everyone goes, "Oh, this is where sales are now," right? So it takes some time for that ripple effect to kind of transverse through. So we're I would say probably like 70% of the way through that, just figuring out where is the bottom, so to speak, and what
Mm.
am I working with?
Yeah.
And then, okay, now what do I do going forward? Because that's kind of there's a common phase. That's where we are right now. So the first thing to do is to figure out, where are you now, right? And that recalibration phase, I would say probably half to maybe three-quarters of companies kind of have a pretty good idea at this point, not all of them.
Hmm.
And then what leaders need to start thinking about is, okay, like what next?
Yes.
Right? I know where bottom is. I want to be out of here. Like, where do I go next? And so I think that is probably two things. One is what's still working,
Hmm.
right? And can I double down or triple down and invest more on what's still working? And then the other would be, okay, like where's the money now? What do my customers care about? And can I go serve that need? And so I'll give you a sort of personal example. So back in 2008, I had a sort of a corporate business in marketing services to CEOs of Inc. 500 companies. And when the stock market crashed, like literally 100% of sales, my sales pipeline disappeared, right? Like in 24 hours, right? Like, oh, wow, that was pretty fast and breathtaking, right? Um, and so fortunately, a couple of clients still had to pay me. So I had a little bit of income for the cash flow for the next 90 days or so. But I
Yes.
knew starting January 1, 2009, zero sales, like literally zero. And so one of the things I did to pivot was I did this research. People started asking a lot about the research around these recessions, and I got a lot of speaking offers. I wrote the book, and then I decided, I think I'm going to go into the turnaround consulting business, right? Because before the crash, nobody cared because they're all doing well anyway. After the crash, everyone's struggling. I'm like,
Yes.
oh, well, this is what people still want, I guess. And I got on TV a whole bunch of times, and I became sort of this, recession expert, even though a month earlier I really wasn't, to be quite honest and candid. But I knew more than the average person, and that's
Right.
what you kind of need in this environment. So I think it's looking for the new opportunity. You're not going to find it sort of, metaphorically staying at home. You got to be out in the marketplace. Now it's Zooming, right? And phone
Yes.
calls.
Yeah.
They'll be talking to a lot of people, you want eyes on the ground who are, feet on the street, so to speak, to use that metaphor. What are people still buying? What do they still care about? If I'm not in the top priority list, well, what's ahead of me in the priority list? Can I
Hmm.
serve one of those top three needs that my customers or my ideal customer now has?
Yeah.
And that's where the thinking needs to be. That's where the market research needs to be. And then for products that are still selling, you got to figure out why, because oftentimes the products still sell, but they still sell for different reasons than before. And
Mm.
the
Very
existing
interesting.
customers, yeah, the existing customers already know, they figured that out without any help from you.
Yes.
But the new customers won't. So you got to educate them by figuring out what's working by accident and then repeating it on purpose.
Yes, I love it. And you've mentioned clients and new clients. I'd be very interested in your perspective during a recession. Is there anything that you've discovered in terms of a pattern of with your current clients versus seeking out new clients?
Yeah, so by far the easiest is to take care of your core clients.
Yeah.
And this is especially true if the kind of offering is not a one-time purchase, right, where it's a replenishment relationship or ongoing service relationship. That's the easiest. And because when people get nervous, they sort of just freeze the status quo,
Yes.
right? And they are afraid of taking any incremental risks because there's so many unknowns. Can I afford it? Is this new vendor going to work out? So there's this very conservative sort of psychological nature right now of taking very few risks. So existing supply relationships, super important. Absolutely, if you haven't done it already, call all your clients up, right? Show them some love, have a conversation. Hey, what are you thinking? Where's your head at? What are you needing? How are we doing? And let's be partners in this and at least sort of maintain that relationship and try to deepen and expand it. So I
Mm.
think that's what you got to do, sort of step one, get your house in order
Yeah.
and make sure that those relationships are secure as can be.
And then number two,
Number
you said,
two, you gotta go get new clients, right? So we're not sitting here forever, right? That's a
right.
survival mechanism. So you make sure your core clients are stable to survive. But then we all want to grow, right? That's why we're doing these things.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes going out and learning more. And I think probably wasn't useful maybe a month ago when sort of things were in a free fall. It wasn't clear how
Yeah.
bad the economy was going to be. It wasn't clear how bad the stock market would be. It wasn't clear how bad the death toll and the infection rates would be. We have a lot more data on that medically. So from an economic standpoint, it creates what we call upper and lower bounds, right?
Hmm.
We know the level of death rate, we know the infection rate within a range that's more predictable. You can make decisions off that with a certain level of uh, precision that we didn't have even like 4 or 5 weeks ago. So now that we figured that out, people have a better idea in the next coming months of what they're interested in. What I think you'll see is people will put out feelers, right?
Hmm.
their homework on something, but they don't want to pull the trigger to buy like this second, right?
Yes.
So one of the things I've been talking to a lot of people about, and I'm doing that myself as well, is this is a great time to get market share. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily the best time to get revenues this particular month, right?
Okay.
So you want to fight for pipeline, you want to fight for sales opportunities, you want to fight for mind share, give away expertise, build your presence, be of value to your community, even when times are tough,
Hmm.
to build the relationship.
Yes.
And the money will come back eventually. Just don't know exactly like what month or what quarter. But if you're already number one, right,
Right.
then you have the mental, emotional role of an existing supplier, right? The risk profile of an existing supplier.
Hmm.
So that's the position you want to compete for. You know, it reminds me a lot of Bill Gates, you know, ran Microsoft for many years here in Seattle. 20 odd some years ago, he was trying to get into the China market, and
Yes.
they didn't have a lot of money. It's a much smaller economy back then. They had a lot of copyright infringement problems. Contract law wasn't great. Wasn't a lot of enforcement. And so a lot of advisors were like, well, we shouldn't go into China because you can't make any money.
Hmm.
And they said, well, it's all going to change at some point, which it has, but I want number one market share, right? So even if they're stealing it all, I want to be the number one stolen operating system in China. I don't want to be number three, right?
Right.
So same idea now is if you can't get the deal and nobody's getting the deal, then you want to be in the pole position, the advisor, sort of the person educating the customer on how to buy in a category. You want to be the thought leader. If they're not buying products and services, then give away free information that helps them make better informed decisions, reduces their risk, helps them get better returns down the road, all that preparatory work. Be super aggressive, outmarket everyone on the things they are consuming, which could likely be information before actual sales rematerialize.
Yes. Great. Anything else that you would love to share in regards to the topic we're talking about?
Yeah, I'd say just my big message is there's a lot of opportunities. They look quite different
Mm.
than what all of us are used to.
Yeah.
And the way to look for it is around like defining what your box is, right? So people talk about thinking outside the box, and the box is usually defined by the products I sell, the people I sell to. That's my box.
Yeah.
And I think a better way is to look at your values and your core skills, right? As a
Mhm.
company, like what are you all about? What are you good at? For outdoor research, they're good at making materials. They're good about saving lives. How is that relevant in today's world? And can that be applied to a problem that people care about? And when you think about redefining the box in those terms, is your core skills, the problems you know how to solve, the values you bring to the marketplace, and then you'll start to see and notice more opportunities. So I think there's a lot out there. They just don't look the same they used to be. And so it's
Mhm.
important to be open-minded about that going forward.
Yes. Thank you. And if someone wants to reach you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so for my books, they're all available on Amazon. So the Recession Proof Business.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also write a lot towards business audiences. I work in the software industry, and my blog is at saasceo.com. That's
Mhm.
software as a service, SaaS,
Yeah.
CEO.com. I post videos, articles, a lot around the virus, because a lot of my medical stuff is on there as well. My comments on where the pandemic is from a medical standpoint. And so that's where all my material these days.
Great. Fantastic. I want to thank you for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I know that this will help a lot of people. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Quite welcome.
Great.